Today we're diving into Onstage Announcements. This video is part of a larger series where we're diving into each of the communication channels available to your church. The hope is by talking about the pros and cons of each of those different communication channels that will equip you to create a communication strategy that works for your church. So let's get into it. First, I want to take just a second and kind of define what I mean by onstage announcements. This could be your lead pastor, it could be another staff member or a volunteer, really anyone getting up on stage during service to deliver announcements. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the pros, and the first pro to onstage announcements is that you've got a captive audience. For the most part, everyone should really be listening to what it is you have to say. They're seated, there's not a lot of distractions going on, so you've got their full attention. That's pretty rare from a communication channel standpoint. I can't say the same thing about email or social media, or really any of the other channels that we've got. This one's pretty unique to onstage announcements. You've got a captive audience. Our second pro is emotional engagement. Most of the communication between humans is actually nonverbal. It's not something that we think about all that often, but the way I'm moving my eyes or my facial expression or the way I'm moving my hands or even my body language is all communicating to you. That's something that not very many communication channels can take advantage of. Onstage announcements is one of them. Our final pro for onstage announcements is personal connection. Whether it is your lead pastor, another staff member, or even a volunteer, whomever it is that's getting up in front of everyone and delivering these onstage announcements has an opportunity to connect with people. There's an opportunity to inject some of their personal creativity, what makes them unique kind of into the delivery of the onstage announcements. Depending on the size of your church, there's even an opportunity for engagement with the crowd during this point in time, which would be really great if you can do that. But many of the other communication channels do not have that opportunity to create that personal connection. So when you're doing onstage announcements, I think it's something you should try your best to take advantage of. Now let's move on to the cons. Our first con is limited capacity or retention. Now, what do I mean by this? Think about how many things you're asking someone to do in a weekend service, from the signs in your building to the bulletin you potentially handed them when they walked in. There's probably signage or something else in the chair backs in front of them. There might be pre-service slides. There's the onstage announcements. There's a whole lot of stuff that you're asking someone to do in a given, hour and a half, however long your service is. And that could even go into the sermon. What is the sermon asking someone to do? There might be life change or, meet us in this room after service, whatever it is. All of that is really competing for someone's attention and their ability to retain that information long term. So I have a homework assignment for you that's related to this. I want you to go through an entire weekend service and write down all of the things that you're asking someone to do. Include all of the little details, stand up, sit down during particular points in time, give this way, download this app, text this thing, scan this QR code, meet us here after the service. Write all of that down. I would guess it's going to surprise you how many different things you're asking someone to do in a given weekend service. The reason that I want you to do this is because most people are not going to remember most of what you've asked them to do. So it's important that as you're kind of crafting your service to keep that in mind, we have to limit the number of things that we're asking people to remember, limit the number of things that we're asking someone to do in a given weekend service. So that's one of the primary cons of onstage announcements, is that there's really limited space and retention. It has to compete with all of those other things happening in the weekend service in hopes that they're going to remember the thing that you mentioned about youth camp or whatever it might be. That leads us to the second con for onstage announcements, and it's difficult calls to action. What is it that you're asking someone to do? Think about that, whether it is meet us in this particular room after the service. It could be sign up for this class. Whatever it is, there's a pretty high likelihood that they're not going to be able to do it right then and there. Or even if they can do it right then and there, that's probably not your intention. Right? You don't want someone signing up for a class on their phone when you're starting your sermon. So for the most part, you're asking them, one, to remember something, and two, take action on it at a later point in time. That's not great, right? There's no other communication channel that we would treat that way. You don't see ads on TV saying like, hey, wait until tomorrow, but I want you to take this action, right? It doesn't work that way. All of the other communication channels are asking for action to be taken immediately. That's on purpose. That's because they're way more likely to remember to take that action if you're asking them to do it right then and there. But that is a really big con for Onstage Announcements, is that you're asking them to do something usually that they can't do right now at a later point in time. So the longer that time is away from when you've reminded them, the higher the likelihood is that they're going to forget about it or not take that action. So really think about that when you're crafting your onstage announcements. What is that action that you're asking someone to take? Make it as easy as possible and try to make it as immediate as possible. So things like meet us at this table in the lobby after service are pretty good, but you'd almost want to remind everyone at the end of service again, hey, if you were interested in this class or whatever it might be, come and join us after service. But that's a pretty big con, because you might be planning, an emotional end to service or a somber end to the service, and adding those announcements in at the end kind of messes up the whole flow of the thing, right? So really think about that. What are you asking someone to do? How long do they have to wait to do it? And really, what is it that you're asking them to do? That brings us to our third con for onstage announcements, and that is dependence on the speaker. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can absolutely mess this up. One of the number one fears people have is speaking in front of people. It's pretty common, right? Like, it's not a fun thing to do. People are going to mess this up. That could be reading it incorrectly. That could be giving false information out. That could be just delivering it poorly. That could be trying to make a joke that either lands flat or, and even worse, could be inappropriate at that given point in time, right? There's a lot of things that can go wrong in this, and you really have to have the right person that, one, feels comfortable doing this, and then two, can really connect with the audience and deliver the information you're trying to deliver in a compelling manner. That brings us to our final con for onstage announcements, and it is that there is no audience segmentation. Whatever the announcement is that you're announcing, it's going out to everyone. You can't specifically target just the left side of the room or the right side of the room. Everybody's getting the same information. So you really need to make sure that whatever it is you're saying can apply to pretty much everybody in the room. So how would I recommend that you actually use onstage announcements? There's a few things that I want you to keep in mind. One is that whatever it is you're announcing really should apply to the whole church, because you can't specifically just target one part of the church or the other. Whatever it is that you're announcing from on stage really should apply to everyone. Second is that whatever you're announcing really needs to be accompanied by some other sort of promotion, because people are not likely going to remember this 3 days from now, and it's difficult for them to take action, whether it's signing up for a class, whatever it might be. It's very difficult to take that action in the middle of service. So whatever you're announcing really needs to have another sort of promotional campaign to go along with it. And then the last thing I would recommend is just keep the number of onstage announcements very low. If you do that homework assignment, you're going to realize you're asking people to do all kinds of different stuff in the course of a weekend service. You don't want that number to be too high, because the higher it is, the more things that you're asking someone to do, the less likelihood it is that they're going to remember or that they're going to take whatever action that you've asked them to take. So keep the number of onstage announcements as small as you possibly can. One last thing to note on this subject is that you really need to keep in mind new visitors when you're crafting this kind of experience that you want for your weekend service. So your onstage announcements really need to keep new visitors in mind as well. Whatever it is that they need to know to participate in your service, you have to give them that information. So whether that's a piece in your bulletin, whether that's onstage announcements, you've got to give instructions to people every single week, because our hope is that you've got visitors every single week. So if you have to stand up during a particular part of your sermon, sit down during a particular part of your sermon, or during transitions from worship into the sermon, guide people through those transitions, especially new visitors. That's it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed this content. Again, this is one in a series of videos. So if you've not seen the other ones, head back over to our YouTube channel or our website, where you'll see all of the other different communication channels available to your church and really learn how to use each of them and craft a communication strategy that works for your church. If you would like help with this, that is what my company does. We help churches just like yours use online tools and communication strategies like this to grow your church one visitor at a time. You can learn more about the work that I'm doing and how to get in contact with me over on my website. There'll be links to that down in the description below. If you've not done so already and you're here on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. That helps other people find this content, which is fantastic. But that is it for today's video. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time.